Okay, for the second part here, we are looking at an equation that is made up of two complex numbers that are equal to each other. So remember right now that a complex number is any number that is written in the form of a plus bi, where bi is the imaginary part and a is the real part. So whenever we write complex numbers, we always split them up into these two parts, a for the real part and bi for the imaginary part. Now, when two numbers are equal that have both a real and an imaginary part, we know that if we set the real parts to each other, they're going to maintain equality, and when we set the imaginary parts to each other, they're going to maintain equality. So in order to solve this, where we've got both a real and imaginary part for each term on the left and right, all we need to do is set the real parts equal to each other and the imaginary parts equal to each other. So the first thing we do is identify the real and imaginary parts. So in this case, the real parts are 5x and 35, and the imaginary parts, those are the parts that have I in it. That's negative 20i and positive yi. So what we do is we go ahead and we set up two equations. The first is having an equation with our real parts equal to each other, and the next is setting up an equation with our imaginary parts equal to each other. So in this first equation, we're going to have 5x, that's the real part on our left-hand side, equals 35. That's the real part on the right-hand side of the equation. So then we set up an equation with our imaginary side. So we've got negative 20i, that's the part from the imaginary part from our left side, and that's equal to positive yi. That's the imaginary part from the left-hand side of the equation. And now we've got a very simple equation to go ahead and solve. In this case, we just divide both sides by 5 to isolate x. So we get x equals 7. And on the left-hand side, you'll see right here, what we need to do is we want to get y by itself. So we're going to divide both sides by I. That's going to isolate y. So we divide both sides by I. Remember, I is just a number. So we just treat it the same as we would any number. So when we get yi divided by I, those i's just cancel, and we're left with I. On the left-hand side, negative 20 times I divided by I, we're just left with negative 20 equals y. So that's the end of our work right there. So when we go ahead and we work on that, we just go through and we end up with x equals 7 and y equals negative 20. So just remember that when you've got two terms that are equal to each other, two complex terms, where in this case we've got 5x minus 20i, we've got a real part and an imaginary. Here we have 35 plus yi, a real part and imaginary. You can solve this just by setting your real part equal to each other and your imaginary parts equal to each other. So as you're going through your homework, if you have any problems that are similar to this, you can always refer back to this video and get some reminders. This is also very similar to example 2 in your book, and also example 2 that we did in class.